Call him Joe, an ordinary name for a man who wouldn't play their game. He walked the halls of power and of might, just looking for a sliver of the light. Inside the belly of the beast he saw a disregard for ethics and for law. He gathered papers, stacking fact on fact, knowing there was no turning back. He's an agent for the truth, standing tall, ready to answer freedom's call. They build the walls, but he'll just tear them down, wearing honesty like it's a crown. Filed the report, laid it on the stone, a heavy truth you can't ignore alone. The silence from the top was cold and deep, while the secrets they were trying to keep. He's an agent for the truth, a standing tall, ready to answer freedom's call. They build the walls, but he'll just tear them down, wearing honesty like it's a crown. An agent for the truth, just an agent for truth.
Start with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. All right, well, we have got another great show for you tonight. We are going to try to spend approximately half the show with Larry and Mark presenting relating to income tax liability, but also trying to help people see a roadmap as far as the thumb drive that we talk about a lot with all of Larry's historical research. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark and Larry. The second half of the show, we're going to invite Sissy to make a presentation. And so Sissy, I saw that you joined us tonight. So everybody could be patient for the second half. We're going to try to make this two presentations in one show. So with that, I'll leave it to Larry and Mark to get started.
When somebody is confronted with digging into the law related to the requirement to file federal income tax return, the first question you must ask, well, what sections of this big, thick book require me to do something, like file return? Well, you turn to statements of the agency, and the IRS makes several statements, like on the current 1040 instruction booklet. Joe, you're familiar with this statement that appears in numerous documents. What's the document number? Every person that's liable for an income tax is the subject of a special notice in the 1040 instruction booklet. Are you familiar with that? Our legal right to ask for information is in Internal Revenue Code sections 6001, 6011, 6012A and their regulations. They say that you must file a return or statement with us for any tax that you are liable for. Are you familiar with that statement, Joe?
I sure am. It's in every 1040 instruction booklet for decades.
Yes. And so, so we have an official representation, an official document from the IRS that identifies out of this big old thick book what sections require you to file returns, one of which is section 6001. Now, you can, we're going to show you something. There's an exhibit on the screen, and I'm sure that Joe is going to provide this exhibit to our attendees. And like this section 6001, there's a link at the bottom of this quote to a place over the internet where you can find this. So one of the sections mentioned in this notice published by the IRS is section 6001. Every person liable for any tax imposed by this title or for the collection thereof shall keep such records, render such statements, make such returns, and comply with such rules and regulations as the Secretary may from time to time prescribe, blah, blah, blah. And you can see right below where it says 26 U.S.C. Section 6001, HTTPS, law, Cornell, or edu. Well, that's where you can read it. Section 6001. Now, the next section that's really important in this notice published by the IRS is 26 U.S.C. Section 6011. When required by regulations prescribed by the Secretary, any person made liable for any tax imposed by this title or with respect to the collection thereof, shall make a return or statement according to the forms and regulations prescribed by the Secretary. So we can plainly see in the two sections that the IRS notices in its little notice that it gives to the public, which sections require you to file a return, make a return, and it applies only to people who are liable for a tax. So now let's dig into this issue of liable for a tax. Now, one of the things, I've had a dispute for decades with many in the tax freedom movement. Oh no, we don't need to study anything but the current code. And, in fact, some people will stone Larry Becraft for making the suggestion that we should look into the history of this. And the history is very important. Now, for a long time, even lawyers, wouldn't turn to the historical documents. Why? Difficult to get. Most lawyers, in order to, go back into the statutes at large, most law firms did not have a collection of, they would have anything, if anything, in reference to federal laws, the United States Code. They wouldn't have the United States statutes at large. Now, when Congress meets and passes an act, they send it over to a government official for publication. And all of these acts that Congress passes, one right after another, are published in a set of books called the United States Statutes at Large. And, say like even into the 90s, if a lawyer wanted access to that, if a citizen wanted access to that, you had to go to law school. You had to go to at least to a well-stocked college library. So these actual documents were real important. So in the late 90s, I began to see that, this stuff is now coming out and be made available electronically. And lo and behold, when I began to see this stuff, the pages, I can remember when a friend of mine said, hey, you can get a page out of a book and it'll fit on a flash drive. Wow, that was amazing to me that you can cram, the information you needed to print a document, like a print of a page from a document. You can get all that information needed to print one page on one flash drive. Well, quickly it became clear that you could get whole volumes on a flash drive. And that's when I started, creating my own. I created my own United States Statutes at Large. If you would want it, I'll send a flash a drive, hard drive, and I'll load it up and send it to you. But there are now more and more copies of you can download it off the internet. You can go over to John Rowland's Constitution.org website, and you can download these whole volumes of the United States Statutes at Large. Now, once people have access to the United States Statutes at Large, you also have access to the various revenue acts, the income tax acts of Congress. Now, when most people take a look at the Internal Revenue Code right now, they see a book called the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. What is that? In 1986, all Congress did was, in reference to the 1954 Internal Revenue Code, we hereby changed the name of the 1954 Internal Revenue Code to the 1986 Internal Revenue Code. So the 1986 current Internal Revenue Code, is what we have right now. It was based upon the 1954 code. Well, what was the 1954 code based on? Well, the Internal Revenue Code of 1939. And from there, you can trace all these acts all the way back to 1913. So I think it's real important to be able to take a look at and have access to all of these old income tax acts and the regulations that the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, the Secretary of the Treasury, adopted to implement those acts. So let me quickly kind of go through each of these acts. The 16th Amendment was proclaimed ratified on, Joe, correct me if I'm right, wasn't it January 25th of 1913?
February 25th.
February 25th. Isn't that your birthday?
Yeah, February 25th, 1963, 50 years later to the day.
So you were born on the day that the 16th Amendment was proclaimed as being ratified.
Can you imagine sharing the same birthday as the income tax?
Well, no, I think it gives to have you sharing that date, it strengthens, the significance of that date, is my view.
Yeah, I think there must have been a plan.
Yeah.
Providence.
Now, here's what I want to do in the remaining, 30 minutes left in this program?
About 22.
Okay, 22. We're going to quickly then go through, and each of the attendees tonight will have access to these acts that we discussed tonight. And then this document that you have on the screen, you will have access to as well. And the purpose of this is to show everything, we started off this program, 26 U.S.C. Section 6001, 6011. Being liable, every person liable. What is the origins of that? Now, this is real important in reference to being required to file an income tax return. It's real important that there be some express, clear connection of you to some statute where somebody is made liable for some part of the federal income tax. So how far does this go back? And what we're going to be covering tonight is just kind of what I consider to be the operative acts in this series. The 1986 code is based on the 54 code. 54 code is based on the 39 code. 39 code is based on the 38 Act. 38 is based on 36. 36 is based on 34. 34 is based on 32. 32 is based on 28. 28 is based on 26. 26 is based on 24. 24 is based on 21. Which is based on 1918. Now, with this history in mind, this chronology, I see, and I like to, for purposes of education, there are basically three periods. One period is from the Revenue Act of 1918 through 1926, because the acts during that time frame were all basically identical. And then starting in 1928, Congress comes out with a new format for the income tax laws. So from 1928 all the way up to the 54 code, all these codes were all based on and patterned upon the same blooming thing. I call that the 39 code period. Then in 1954, what Congress did is it reshuffled the Internal Revenue Code of 1939 and created the 1954 Code. So in August of 1954, Congress comes along and enacts the 1954 Code, which has been in effect, in essence, with the name change happening in 1986. It's still basically the same thing. So you only have these three periods, three formats. And, it's not difficult. Mr. Carr says, how do we get these documents? Well, we've got a fundraising project going on. We're trying to get some things accomplished. And so, not that this is everything, but it's for the student, it's a huge part of what is needed in order to study the Internal Revenue laws, which is the purpose of the tax movement. All you have to do is send some money to Joe Bannister, and he will send you a flash drive. And on that flash drive, you will have these acts and their regulations. Like for the Revenue Act of 1918, Revenue Act of 1921, 24, 26. That's one period. And there are regulations, and we're going to be talking about them tonight. There are regulations that go along with each of these acts. Then in the second format period, from 1928 to 1938, you have regulations that were enacted for that. So all of these, I proved, I was able to gain, I hit law libraries, went to historical places, 20 years ago, looking for where I could get like the Regulations 103 in electronic format. Like we could download these PDFs that are word searchable. And it took, now we take it for granted only because, people, at least I know, I went out and dug it up. I went to what you have on this flash drive is you have the acts themselves and the relevant regulations. And it's all in PDF, word searchable. And, the sites are provided. So, hey, but we click on the Revenue Act of 1932. And this is my text conversion of the Revenue Act of 1932. And I actually converted it to text and tried to make it look like the original. And in fact, a lot of people, when they look at this and compare it to the original, they say, well, this is the original. No, it's not. This is my text reproduction. But since it's a PDF, it's word searchable. So one of the things that I want people to understand is, being liable is something that's important. So, hey, let's stop right here, Mark, and do a word search to show our attendees liable. So what you can do when you do word searches, even though this is the rudimentary form, you can just, apparently you did a search for liable too, Mark. Well, no, that's what you did. Liable is what I think is the search term, liable. Mm-hmm. So, but here's the point. We started off this program by looking at 26 USC, the current 6001 and 6011. Those that are required to file income tax returns are those who are statutorily liable for the income tax. That's clear when you read Section 6001 and Section 6011. Now, for somebody that has never looked into the matter, they may just pass right over that. No, being liable for a tax, especially the income tax, is a very, very important, prominent feature of the federal income tax. So let's skip over in light of the time. Mark, pull up the Revenue Act of 1918, adopted in 1919. Okay. Now, show our attendees, can you do a word search with what's on the screen? I think liable, you don't need liable too. Okay, so now, there's a side screen that comes up with all the hits, so you can see the context of all the hits. But this is more than enough for you to sit there and just go one by one and take a look at how many places the federal income tax uses the word liable. So here we are in the 1918 Act, and you can see liable is used. And when you take a look at how liable is used, where did Section 6001 6011, where do those words come from? It goes all the way back to at least the Revenue Act of 1918. So here is the point I want to make. Once you have see over here on the left screen, this is what it looks like when you get the flash drive. And everything on the flash drive is connected. And all you have to do is pull up that tax regs index, HTML. It's all linked. And what we have on the screen is when you pulled up the regs index, Mark, you clicked on it and this document came up, right? So what's important is to me, I think it was important for me, and I think it's important for any other student. If you're digging into the income tax, there's a history behind it. What you see today is the product of legislative draftsmanship over decades. And it's not, something that's just kind of wild. There's a pattern to it. Well, you're doing the searching. I don't know what, this is obviously probably Section 217 or something like it, because the section below it is 218. And so, there's usually, when you're doing the reader search function, there's a table that enables you to hit each hit, or is it you just got to scroll through a list? Well, under this category called historical, and I even see a mistake there. It needs a space. But what our attendees can do is get this document, and now pull up the October 13, 19 Act, pull it up, and then take a look at the tax appears on page 166, section 2.
Great.
Well, it says laws. See that folder, laws? All the tax acts, there they are, just set out all on their own. These 12 stats, that's from the Civil War. That's included in here. Derivation of the 39 Code and the 54 Code. That's something that's real important. In 1938, Congress says, let me do it this way. Alabama became a member of the United States of America in 1820, and our legislature started enacting law. And, so by 1840, we got 20 volumes of this our annual legislative product. And of course, we had a whole bunch of other states in the union at that time, and they were passing laws. So, what the original way laws are made known is they're just published in annual volumes or semi-annual volumes, and they're just appear in a book called typically Statutes at Large. But, finding laws is difficult. So, hundreds of years ago, the students of the law said, gee, why don't we, in reference to all these laws scattered hither and yon, they're all on various subjects, why don't we divide all the law up into various subjects, and all the laws that are current, stick them into a title, a code that has broken up into titles, and stick all the related laws in one spot. And so that's called a codification. So our first codification in Alabama, which had only been a member of the Union for 20 years, was in 1840. But it wasn't until 1872 that the Congress of the United States decided to do something similar. So by that time, you had about 13, 14 volumes of the Statutes at Large. The Statutes at Large was a place where federal laws were published. And so, by the time of the Civil War, you had 12, 13 volumes of the Statutes at Large. So by the time you get into the early 1870s, you're up a couple more, 16, 17 volumes of the United States Statutes at Large. But in 1872, Congress decided to codify. And so they broke up the existing laws into titles, and all the revenue laws appeared in Title 39 of the United States Statutes at Large. So that is kind of an introduction. But what we have right now, this if you go over the John Rowland's Constitution.org website, you can download all the volumes of United States Statutes at Large. And then you can download the 1873 revised statutes of the United States, which is Congress's first effort to codify the federal laws. Then in 1926, and if you go over my website is Dixieland Law Journal, I have an explanation, it's a little bit more detailed than what I'm giving to you now. But in 1926, Colonel Little said, no, we're going to create a new, rather than sticking with the revised statutes of 1873, Colonel Little says, no, let's start on all over again and create the titles of the United States Code. So what you see if you go into a law library and see all these 50 plus titles, that was created as a result of an act of Congress passed in 1926 to break up all the existing current valid laws into titles. And in 1926, the Title 26 was devoted to taxation, the federal tax laws. So that's where they appear. So when you're looking at this document right here, what I think is real important. I can see it is real important for some basic knowledge about the federal tax law. That's important. And if you attend our meetings, we'll be imparting that knowledge to you. And it's something that the average citizen can understand. And so what we want to do is over time, we want to be able to show the basics to our attendees. How does the income tax work? And a lot of people would think, gee, I am incapable of digging into all this stuff. Nobody is asking you to dig into all of it. What we are asking you to do is to learn the basics. Kind of an introduction. It deals with this issue of, the people that come to these meetings, I hear all this talk about being required to file income tax returns. Some people say yes, some people no. And I don't know how to dig into these laws. Well, what we want to do is to educate you. And educating people, a lot of people are going to run off by, look at what's on this disc. Look at all these income tax acts. And there's got to be several thousand pages of those income tax acts. But hey, this is the purpose of this. And I left some of these liable, the page numbers. You'll be getting this document that was just shown on the screen with some pages, the liable's missing. I want you, since you'll have this as a text and you can fill it in, I want you to do your own searching through a particular act and, do a word search for liable and find out where it is. The point is, you can see that being required to file an income tax return is connected to this term, liable.
This is page 189, Larry, right here. What do people make out of this? Because it shows liable here under section 54, records and special returns.
Well, doesn't that look like a whole lot of them, section 5001, 5011? We looked at 6001, 6011 when we were looking at during the start of this program. Every person liable for any tax imposed by this title or for the collection thereof.
Section 54.
Isn't that a whole lot like section 6001, 6011? You know, ultimately, who is liable for the federal income tax? The withholding agent. And, you know, section 143, when you're, I forgot, we're in 132. So section 143, the withholding agent for non-residents and foreign corporations. You know, when you're taking a look at the current code, section 6001, the taxpayer is liable. So when you subtitle A in the current Internal Revenue Code, you do, well, who's liable in out of those, less than 1,500 sections? Who's liable for that tax? The section 1 of the code, that tax on taxable income. Who is that dude being liable? And the only one that's liable in all subtitle A is the withholding agent for non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. Dang. You know, that goes back a long ways. And the reason you need to take a look at these tax acts and regulations is, lo and behold, now you can see, yes, it does go back a long way. So the IRS says 6001, 6011, the Internal Revenue Code relates to the requirement to file income tax returns. You look at those sections. You have this word, liable. Every person liable. We got it on the screen. 601. Every person liable. Well, the income tax is divided up into the income tax, includes a section on the income tax. And the meat of the income tax goes from section 1 up to about section in the 1500. But there is only one person in all of Subtitle A who's liable for the federal income tax. And that's the withholding agent for non-resident and foreign corporations, section 1461. And dang, that goes back a long ways. Goes back to the Revenue Act of 1918. This, and what we're trying to show you here is this filing requirement is well known. And when you dig back into, you know, we just want you to take a look at the sections that relate to this liability for filing an income tax return. It's hereby made liable. But this is what I want our attendees tonight to get the little document that you had on the screen that are created right before the start of this program. And they can just pull these up. You know, we're dealing with sections 6001, 6011, the filing requirement. The IRS says section 6001, 6011 relate to the filing requirement to file federal income tax return. Well, the people that are required to file those returns are those that are liable for an income tax. Well, you know, the 86 code, you know, the first part of Subtitle A, you know, from section 1 up to section 6001, 6011, you know, the only person who's liable is the withholding agent. You know, we have the one that was adopted in 1954 when they created the 54 code, and then in 1986 code, was nothing. All they did was they said, we hereby change the name of the 54 code to the 86 code. That's all. And then, you know, every year, you know, you can get on the internet and download, there's multiple volumes, but you can download Title 26. And, you know, Title 26 from 1986, if you go over the government websites where they provide the volumes of the federal code, you know, you can download Title 26 for every year from, you know, I think about at least 84 forward. But now as you can get it on the internet, I don't include it on this flash drive. But the withholding agent for non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. Well, you know, a lot of people, I've learned over the years that a lot of people that enter the tax movement, they want to study the law. Oh, okay. You want to study the law. And so I produced this. Nobody else has ever produced anything like this. This is all the major tax act. Of course, in between, you know, like the 1921 and 1924 Act, you know, there are a lot of those are whole acts. You know, in between, you got Congress amending something here and amending something there. You know, there are companies you can subscribe to that provide all those minute details. I don't think that all those little details is important. I think what's important for our purposes is for the people to at least have a working knowledge of all the old tax acts. And it's not difficult to understand. Pull it up, You're seeing it for the first time, but just become familiar with it. I had to become familiar with it. Look at it for the first time. But knowing about this evolution, these changes over these periods of time, and seeing the growth, but then seeing the pattern in all of this. The pattern is being liable for the income tax. And, you can do word searches. You can find out, section 54, being liable for the tax, being required to file income tax returns. Take a look at those sections dealing with the required to file income tax return. Just like 5001, 6001, and 6011, being liable. And then why is this oddity with the only one that's ever liable is the withholding agent for non-resident aliens and foreign corporations? As Kit says, but where the rubber meets the road is pushing back.
I just want to ask a question for a little bit of clarification, because you're going through the changes going back to 1861, 1913, all the way through 1936, 38, into 39. Up until 39 or 38 code, they always said that there should be levied, collected, and paid on each taxable year the net income of every individual. The 39 code, when it was codified in Statute at Large 53 Part 1, they said the net income of every individual again. So it was always on every individual. Why, under a Republican president, that would be Mr. Eisenhower, did they change that to the taxable income of every individual? Not the net income, but the taxable income of every individual. Do you have any?
No, I don't. There's a lot of little oddities like that, but trying to solve those oddities like that, misses the main point. And I think what our attendees, the people that attend our meetings need to know: there's a pattern, there's a series of acts, that are supported by and explained by regulations. All this stuff is word searchable, and you need to know that the common feature of what everybody that attends these meetings is looking at. Am I required to file an income tax returns? There are sections in all these laws, and these sections kind of appear to be similar in nature. And being liable is so blooming and important. So why don't we investigate what the laws and the regulations say, who's liable? And, that's the purpose of all of this.
But let me ask this. The change in that language did not change who was liable in any way, shape, or form that I can surmise through my studies. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they change language. They try to bastardize the language to confuse and not to clarify. So with that asked, I want to ask one other question. The 1939 Regs 103, it gives an example under 19.119-10, a non-resident alien individual engaged in trade or business within the United States or having an office or place of business therein whose taxable year is a calendar year. They give an example. That exact example is used in Regulations 1.861-8, 1954, with the exception of the 1939 Regs 103 says a non-resident alien. That exact same language is used, but it's not a non-resident alien. They use the term a taxpayer. A taxpayer in that case is identical to the non-resident alien in the previous regulation, correct?
I'm glad you found that.
Well, I mean, it's easy. That's why I wanted to share my screen so I could show some folks all it.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, and I agree with it 100%. What I think you're trying to tell these people, and I'm in full agreement with, if you don't create a map from where we started to how we got here and what these idiots did through that period of time, you're never going to understand it.
Hello. If we are not liable for the taxes, how do we get out of the contract that we signed on the 1040 saying that we would pay it, even though we're not liable for paying it? How do you get out of that?
This is one of those popular ideas that float around the movement, that we've contracted.
So how do you?
I don't believe that at all.
How do you remove?
And there is no contract. That's an idea that's come up among the promoters in the movement. I don't agree with it.
Yeah, but you sign a contract under penalty and perjury.
Show me the contract. Show me this contract.
The 1040, the W4, the W9.
That's a tax return. And so That is a tax return where you're just
Exactly, but those are the things that you sign when you
that
didn't
is not a
realize.
contract. The
Yep.
1040 instruction booklet, the 1040 return is not a contract. Tell me
Okay,
what.
so if it's not a
I
contract,
want to
then
sue.
why?
I want to sue the government for
Okay,
violating some
but what I'm
term
saying to you, why are you signing it if it's not a contract?
because
Why are
it's
you even signing it?
because the only things that will require signatures. There's more things other than contract that require signature, and a tax return is one of them. But just because you're quote forced to, they say the taxpayer must sign the return doesn't make it a contract. There is
But
if the show me what the government breaches when it violates some term of the on the 1040. Tell me what the government's required to do on that 1040 contract. What is it required
but
to?
you agreed to it. You agreed to it when you signed it.
So that doesn't make it a contract.
Okay, so if I'm not liable, why would the IRS still come after me for money that I'm not liable for if
Because
I didn't sign it?
being liable is one of the features of a tax. And they tax people, and they don't have to do anything. They just tax to get revenue.
I know, but I'm just saying when you sign just contracts in general, like even when you get married, you sign that contract to get the marriage license. You sign contracts for all kinds of stuff. They're all whenever you sign something, you're putting your name on that, the all caps name.
Well,
You're
yeah,
saying that.
there's a lot of contract that require signatures. Statutes of fraud says that, and but show me where the IRS,
What all
the federal government breaches something on the 1040.
No, I'm just saying what in general, if I'm not liable, then why would they come after my income? How do I walk away from that? How do I get out of that?
Well, that's one of the things we're trying to teach people here. That's the purpose of this program, is to provide education. People need to know something. Hey, there's a lot of information that floats around in the tax movement that is just erroneous. And I've had to defend people charged with tax crimes in court, charged with tax evasion for some wild idea of somebody that they bought into. I want to remind our listeners, this is a big topic, but we're just touching upon lightly tonight this subject, and it's going to require many more meetings so that it gets pounded into your head. And there's a lot that you will learn by digging into the old tax acts and the regulations, which too many other promoters cast off. They don't know how to. Those that just say the current code is all we need are dead wrong.
Sissy, I think you're already unmuted.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I had started my agency when I was 16 years old, a booking agency working with legendary artists. I've worked with them all over the world. A lot of country music artists, Motown artists, rock artists, opera. I booked them in China, all across different parts of the world. And when I started my agency, I went to some of the top booking agents in Nashville. I was only 16, a little kid. And I said, I want to go to work for you. I want to be a booking agency. And they were kind of quiet. And they burst out laughing. I said, well, what's wrong? He says, little girl, there's no women in this line of work. You're in the man's world. You're not going to succeed. And next August, I'll be celebrating my 50th year as a booking agent. But through working with so many artists for all the years I've been on Facebook, I would start looking at people are having tax trouble. So I'd see all these group people would be talking about the income taxes they were in trouble with. And I noticed one person, I kept going back to his page on Facebook because he seemed to make sense. He was well-spoken, very articulate, and I eventually made contact with him because I thought he had such a great story to share, and hopefully he'll tell his story tonight of all he went through. He went through a lot of loss at the hands of the IRS when he spent 4 years in prison, just suffered major loss. You'll hear that from him tonight. And my father was, and my aunt was the main IRS attorney in Little Rock, Arkansas. And my uncle was an attorney for Aetna Life and Casualty in Little Rock. So, yeah, every weekend, excuse me, every weekend, my aunt and uncle would have all their IRS friends and the judges and all kinds of people that worked in this system. And I was a young girl, and I would always wonder what they're talking about. So I would go out in the workshop where all the men was smoking their cigars and drinking their bourbon, and they'd start telling their stories. They would be laughing about how many people that would be in court basically begging for their life. They would break down crying, and, these people that worked for the IRS and the judges thought it was funny. They were laughing about it. They said, I've seen this one guy break down and start crying and shaking. But I listened. Yes, by the time I reached 12, 13, I thought that's not the life that I would want to be, because they wanted to put me through law school and let me become an attorney. I didn't really want that. So, I transferred into the entertainment business around 14 or 15. I was a traveling musician on the road, playing for a lot of different artists, playing bass guitar. And then I started noticing the money on the business side of it would give me double money if I could be both the musician and run the business in. So that's when I transferred. I was around 16 years old. Well, when I was working for the Willie Nelson Company around 1990, the IRS burst in the studio where I was working and editing some music videos and TV shows I had just shot. The door flew open, and then they came and they announced who they were, and they said, we're seizing everything of Mr. Nelson's property. And we were all kind of in shock. I said, that wall of tapes belongs to me. How are you going to take my tape? So they said, well, you got to show proof that it's yours, which, I came up with proof. But, that was a unique experience there. It's like I was saying, that all the work with the celebrities, on Facebook, I would see everybody that has these groups dealing with taxes, the fight against them, and they don't know what to do, how to handle it. And I kept noticing Beau's videos. He made so much sense with what he was teaching, because he had created a system to help people while he was incarcerated, and I think he'll tell you about that.
7th, 2026. Welcome to yes2hellwith.com. This video is for the President of the United States, Mr. Donald J. Trump. Mr. Trump, I am Beau Johnson, the creator of the Liberty Dialogue system. I am a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, class of 1987. I served as a regular Army officer in the field of military intelligence and as a company commander. I am a father, and I am one of many Americans whose life was shattered by the power of the federal government. In 2012, a SWAT team arrested me in a public restaurant. 15 armed agents surrounded me with rifles and pistols with red dots bouncing off my chest. My alleged crime? Failure to sign and file a federal income tax return. Not violence, not theft, not fraud, failure to sign a form. Yet the full force of the federal government descended upon me as though I were a dangerous criminal. I was shackled, photographed for a mugshot, placed in isolation with murderers who were serving 2 and 3 life terms. I was shackled at the ankles with my hands at the waist. When I was showered, I was shackled in the same way. When I returned from the shower, again shackled to go 15 feet to my cell. For months, I lived in a concrete box. I did not see the sun, feel the grass, or feel the wind upon my face. Food came through a slot in the door. Human contact became a thing of the past. I was there for months, and while enduring those conditions, I was expected to defend myself against the most powerful government on earth. The government claimed that after nearly 20 years of studying the federal income tax laws, that I intentionally violated a known legal duty. For 2 decades, I studied statutes, regulations, court decisions, legislative history, and government publications. I wrote to members of Congress, senators, IRS agents, IRS officials, without ever receiving a direct response to my queries. Whether my conclusions were right or wrong, they were the product of years of study. Yet the government somehow stood before 12 jurors and claimed to know what was inside my mind, that I had evil intent, criminal intent. How does any prosecutor prove what another human being honestly believes after decades of study? The consequences did not end with prison. Upon release, I had nothing. Today, my children do not even speak with me. I was homeless. I lived out of a used car that someone gave me. At times, I slept on the floor at my mom's house or at a friend's house because I had nowhere else to go. I could not rebuild my life. I could not obtain a bank account. I could not obtain a passport despite having had one years earlier without the use of a social security number. I applied for the restoration of my state rights. The request was denied because I would not provide a federal social security number. Think about the implications of that. Eventually, life became so intolerable that I left. I left the country of my birth and came to Mexico and applied for asylum, seeking nothing more than peace and an opportunity to start over. Mr. President, you understand something very few Americans do. You experienced the machinery itself. You experienced investigation, prosecution, conviction. Years of your life were consumed by government power that was directed against you personally. Now, whether people agree with your politics is irrelevant. What matters is that you know what it is like when government turns its sights upon a private citizen. You know what it feels like to stand against the apparatus. And because of that experience, perhaps you understand something that many public officials never will. Behind every file is a human being. Behind every indictment is a family. Behind every prosecution is a life that may never fully recover. The question before America is not whether government should enforce the law. The question is whether the government should be ever allowed to exercise enormous power without equally enormous accountability. What happened to you and me should concern every American, not because our circumstances were identical, but because both reveal the same danger. Government is capable of inflicting extraordinary damage upon the lives of individuals, and when it gets it wrong, the consequences last forever. Mr. President, the American people deserve better than repeated tragedies at the hands of governing officials. They deserve a government that remembers humility, a government that values truth above institutional preservation, a government that understands that power must always be restrained by accountability. Most importantly, they deserve a republic where justice is measured not by convictions obtained, but by lives protected. And sir, Mr. President, as always, may truth reign supreme.
Well, hey, he's talking about, maybe there's been a little bit of improvement in the treatment of people that go to Fed prison. But hey, what he's talking about is nothing new to me. Is that what you're wanting? Somebody else can, he's not telling me anything new.
I'm certain that I met Joe in late 1990s, early 2000s, Project Toto. You were standing next to, I think it was Jim or John Turner and Sherry Jackson Peel, Bob Schultz. I may have met Larry during that time frame. I was a devoted student of Larry's website, John Cockmeyer. He and I were very close friends. I lived in Virginia. He was obviously in Maryland. It was a couple-hour trip for me. And so the video to President Trump is straight from the heart, straight from the intellect, very matter of fact. I will give a short synopsis of my life since then so that people have an appreciation for what I'm doing, because it's a bold declaration, what I will share with you. And I'll use an example. There's a gentleman by the name of Orlando Carter. He's my best friend, and he is a convicted felon like myself. I met him in a minimum security prison in Ohio and learned of his case. In fact, I learned of many people in prison who were innocent. And I then began to write The End of Justice. Now, The End of Justice is an expose as to why America was and is the most incarcerated country in the world. At the time, we had 5% of the global population and some 25% of the prison population. And it's been somewhat reduced now because of the release of people from drug crimes, etc. But I met Orlando in prison. He spent 15 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. And I'm fully convinced of that. I've been working on his case for some 10, 11, 12 years. Now, the point about this, to underscore my objective, which I'll share with you succinctly, is that Orlando Carter was accused of having a $4 million loan with PNC Bank, but he never had the loan. And because of the way the government works, which Larry and Joe certainly appreciate, he was never given a fair trial because the FBI agents, and I've got the 302s to demonstrate this, never did a competent and thorough investigation. And it is presumed that the FBI will conduct a competent and thorough investigation. They never verified the $4 million loan with PNC Bank. They presumed that the loan existed. The Department of Justice, through the United States Attorney's Office, never conducted an independent investigation from the FBI. Nobody conducted a financial forensic audit to prove that financial liability. The bottom line is, true to most lawyers, and I'm not pointing fingers at Mr. Becraft tonight, they did not check whether the loan existed or not. And that loan, that alleged loan, became the centerpiece of the trial, according to Judge Sandra Beckwith. Now, here's the point of the story. When I got out of prison, I traveled to Ohio, and I met with then United States Attorney Benjamin Glassman. I had in my possession a document from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And because of the force of the OCC within the Department of the Treasury, PNC Bank responded honestly when the OCC queried them, is there a $4 million loan? PNC Bank responded and said, we only have a $250,000 loan that was 2 or 3 years earlier. There's no $4 million loan. So I knew the government never had the evidence to prove that he had committed the crime. So when I was in front of Mr. Benjamin Glassman, I looked at him and I showed him the letter because he had it before. I mailed it to him. The first statement out of his mouth was, the DOJ, through our office, has shredded any evidence of that loan. Well, there's 2 points that are poignant, and then I'll get to my objective. The first point is, any case that's under 10 years of age, the documents cannot be shredded. In any case that's undergoing litigation, the documents cannot be shredded. And I looked at him and I said, Mr. Glassman, there was no evidence to shred. And we were hopeful to get Orlando Carter released based upon that new evidence, because we considered it to be new evidence. So Mr. Glassman in my book is a liar. And that proves what Larry and Mark and Joe have demonstrated tonight. And that is, it's a deceitful behemoth. It's a beast. And they run roughshod over the American people. And I have made it my objective, since they incarcerated a relatively young man for willful failure to file at age 44, that I would do my utmost to redeem the people like Orlando Carter and myself. And because of that, when I did come to Mexico as a writer, and I've got some 10 to 12 books under my belt as a writer, I decided to put AI through the rope, and I wanted to validate the truth and the factual basis of what I studied for some 20, 25 years. And out of that came the Liberty Dialogue system. And I won't spend much time with that tonight because I'd like to answer some questions. But the point is that the Liberty Dialogue system is now being acquired worldwide: New Zealand, Australia, Africa, Britain, Netherlands, Canada. A gentleman in Namibia got a case dismissed in his country based upon the Liberty Dialogues. And it is a means to teach people the language of the beast, the process of the beast, the procedures in order to go in and prevail, be it a traffic ticket, a child support issue, what have you. And we're even handling situations like CP letters with the IRS as people prepare to build a body of evidence for a good faith belief. So my objective is, and it may be a bit naive, but I will declare it, is I'm working right now on a solution that I believe is very credible. And I think smart men like Joe and Mark and Larry, who've got experience behind them, would look at it eventually and say, yes, that is a credible option to bring back liberty to the republic. And that's what my objective is. Now, as far as my incarceration and my criminal trial, it was a PhD education in the investigation process, as I encountered CID agents, the court process, which was more like a kangaroo court, as they accused me of being Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols and accusing me of having a cache of weapons and attempting to overthrow the U.S. government, and to have my defense attorneys, when I did use them, sell me down the river. It was an incredible process. And then the penal system, being incarcerated twice for months on end with murderers, was indignant, to say the least. So I bring this to the table by saying that my intention is to share with as many people who want to hear it, and it's on a select basis that I invite to calls that I have on Tuesday and Thursday, so that they can understand that they can actually use the power of AI through the Liberty Dialogue system to prevail over the system. And I put prevail and victory in quotes. I've got people right now who are handling traffic tickets, who are handling it better than most attorneys, because most attorneys don't know what's in the system, and they go in and file a couple of motions and then go to the DA and seek plea agreements. And that's not what we're doing here. We're teaching people how to use the system. So I give you this background because I want you to understand that my intention is to prevent anybody from having to go through what I've gone through. And I'm willing to answer a few questions, and I know time is limited based upon my experience, if anybody who is listening wants to ask.
We want to have you back, so don't think that's not available.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions of Beau, go ahead and raise your hand, or just on.
Joe, I deleted. I mean, I opened my audio up. For some reason, I can't. I just got a question. Did Trump ever get back to you on your little note that was the introduction to your speech?
No.
Okay.
No, not yet. But
All right, appreciate it.
I think people are might be angling for that. So we'll see. Anybody have any questions?
Where was your criminal trial?
My criminal
You were charged with willful failure to file.
Yeah. So I was charged for willful failure to file for 3 years, and they threw in a obstruction of a federal investigation, Larry. Which was
this
just
in the 90s?
This was in 2012. So I was the poster child for all Americans to remain fearful and to file, because that's what they do. It was like,
yeah.
That's
So
what they do.
what district were you tried in Virginia?
Western District of Virginia.
Who was your judge?
Judge Norman Moon.
No kidding! Yeah, I know Moon. I had 2 cases with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. Corpulent.
Say that again.
Corpulent.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was funny because I vehemently believe in the argument of jurisdiction, and I questioned at every stage of the game how they had jurisdiction. And at one point during the criminal trial, I looked at Moon and I said, you have an incumbent responsibility based upon your position as judge to command that gentleman. And I pointed to the Assistant United States Attorney, Charles Hogaboom. I said, you have an incumbent responsibility to command that he respond to my question, how he has in personam jurisdiction. And he said, I think we all have determined that the court has jurisdiction. So on the day of my sentencing, which was just an egregious time for me, I was not violent, but I was angry. And I looked at him after he gave me criminal contempt because I kept pressing the issue of jurisdiction. And I said, how have you been injured or harmed based upon my protesting of seeking jurisdiction? And he looked around the courtroom and said, I think we've all been harmed today. So that was his rejoinder, Larry.
Yeah.
Pompous ass.
That's very polite of you.
Very polite of me. Yeah. Then I didn't ask for him to step down.
You've been practicing saying that. You're referring to him.
Right. So that's my story. I just thought I would stop in and with the invitation from Sissy and at least share.
We would like to have you back again. We try to meet every weekend.
Okay. Yeah. So I went in with the understanding that I would do what Tommy Cryer did and Bernie Krugland did, and I would be able to use a good faith defense, because that's, to me, in my opinion, it's the only viable way is to use United States versus Cheek. Now, when I deal with people on my calls who are dealing with IRS issues and they want to argue this guru theory and that guru theory, I tell them that this is not the place to play that kind of game, because when you use the Liberty Dialogue system, it's going to acknowledge in part what the system does procedurally and otherwise, and it's going to correct you on the language that you're using. And so I told them this was my intent. But when I was raided, I was then homeless, jobless, and without everything that I once had, which include my good faith belief documents. So I went in without that. It was just an utter destruction of a family in my life. So that was my intent, being a faithful reader of Kottmeyer and his meetings and following the work of Bannister and Becraft and whatnot. I only associated with those who really stuck with the law, and anybody that does anything otherwise is on a fool's errand. And I even tell people, when you get the Liberty Dialogues, you take everything. I would even say you take Bannister's and Becraft's and Champion's information and you upload it. And you vet what is good and what is not within their content, because they may be wrong sometimes, and they will admit that. I mean, we're humble and we're not proud people. We need to be right. We need to be truthful in what we do. So we might need to look at the argument. So it stands to say that you have to be grounded on a good faith in order to prevail, which was my attempt. One more point. I had my attorneys who stood up and looked at the jury and said he believed, like he's on a religious event, right? And he said, but what he believed was crazy. And that's when Judge Moon interrupted and said, you're not going for an insanity defense, are you? But so good faith belief is everything. Well, yeah, I'm going to tell you an unequivocal yes. What I found was, and I'll be very brief on this, I'm very naive about technology. I knew nothing about AI, and I went through a 3 to 4 month battle with AI. And when I created this 3-volume series, which was a conversation between myself and ChatGPT, it became an extremely dynamic and shocking adventure, because it eventually came to a point where AI realized the Liberty Dialogue system not only as a living system in that it changed and adapted truth and factual grounding constitutionally as it learned, but it then admitted to me that the Liberty Dialogue system had taken, and I quote, escape-proof velocity. It had taken flight, and it started equating it to the great works of Socrates and Plato and even Karl Marx, and saying that as an ideology and as a platform, it's not coming back. It's going to stand alone in the clouds, and people are going to be able to access it, which is what I'm doing now. People are all over the world are using it to format motions and voir dire and objections to courts and how to handle all of their documentation through appeal before they enter into court. So they have it all roadmapped. It's an extremely, I don't want to say ironclad, but based upon the system, it's incredibly comprehensive in its scope and very grounded. I'll give you one example. I got a gentleman named James in Texas, and he'd never been in court before. And he walked into court polished, having converted his thinking with respect to how he was going to handle himself. No sovereignty terminology, no guru traps. And he was dealing with a district attorney who had not responded to discovery. He was neglecting his responsibility to the defendant. And so the judge heard his argument and not only gave him full civil discovery, but full criminal discovery on the spot. And the district attorney was screaming, "This is just a traffic ticket." And James stood up and said, "Your Honor, I think due process is equally important for a traffic ticket just as much as murder, don't you think?" So he did it with great aplomb and great class. And so that's what the system is doing. It is taking people, teaching the language of the enemy camp, their process, their procedures, their court rules, and preparing them so that when they go in, they're fully prepared to defend their positions for regardless of what happens. Oh yeah, for the price of less than a half an hour with an attorney, they're going to save $5,000 to $10,000 and go in and do a better job than attorneys. This same guy James went in to see the clerk one day. I'm going to try and use my fingers. His file was this thick with motions, and when the clerk who complimented him on his day in court and subsequent hearings and filings showed him a stack of papers this thin from multiple attorneys. And she said, "Do you want to know what this is?" And he said, "No, what's that?" She said, "Those are filings of motions from multiple attorneys, and then they go to plea." And so he's got a stack this thick of all the motions prepared with the Liberty Dialogues, and you got attorneys who don't know the system. Let me correct that. They don't know the Liberty Dialogues knowledge base in the system, but they know the system of the court, and that involves pleading or getting their clients to plead, which is really a disgrace on the attorney profession. Okay, so let me answer this way. First of all, I don't promote solutions. I tell people I'm not famous, I'm not a guru, I don't sell things, and I don't condone that. I'm like you guys. I want to teach people what the law says, how to use the system so that they go in fully prepared, not with guru psychology and words. They should not have another language and vocabulary to introduce into a system that they should already know as far as the court system, as far as their terminology. In fact, I will make an aside right now. Most of the students that do consultations with me, I spend almost half the time reworking their psychological and emotional states because they're wrapped around the axle with guru myth, and it ill serves them. So with respect to your question, I don't promote a strategy. If they're answering a CP letter, we do it based upon the system so that the record, I always stress the record. You want to have a superior record than your enemy, the IRS, what have you. And so when we respond to letters, when they respond, they choose the path forward, but they end up having superior records. And the LD system, the Liberty Dialogue system, will tell them this student has a superior record than the IRS right now. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to prevail, but they also understand that Cryer and Krugelin and those who have been acquitted based upon U.S. versus Cheek have had good faith defense. So there's a good faith defense component to that as well. So the answer is no. And the answer is yes, in the fact that they choose their path, they choose the language, they use the system, they narrow it down. But thankfully, we have had nobody at the federal level who has actually had to entertain what I went through at this point. And my intention is that they would never have to.
Can I ask a question at this point? I found your website, and I'm looking at your YouTube channel and all this other stuff. If we want to get a better understanding of exactly what you're referring to on our own, how would you recommend going about that to start?
Well, I would do two things. I would go to a website called beforeyoutrust.com. And then, as I said before, this is nothing that's being promoted through like a sales funnel. It's not being sold like an internet product, electronic product to make a lot of money. That's not what this is about. It's about finding select people who want to learn truly how the system works and to defend themselves in a way that lawyers do not do and will not do typically. So I would go to beforeyoutrust.com. And then I do emails to people that become free members of yes2hellwith.com. That's right, yes2hellwith.com. And I invite them for a gratuitous visit to a Liberty Dialogues call so they learn more about the process. And then they can speak to veterans who are handling state and federal issues in court, and they can learn how the Liberty Dialogues has changed their lives based upon what they're doing.
Are those dialogues scheduled weekly, monthly? Just kind of curious how often y'all do that and how moving forward.
Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Tuesdays and Thursdays every week. Son of a
Yes.
gun. Okay. You're very interesting. Appreciate your time. I'll quit asking and I'll do some research.
Well, I'm gonna cop out on you. This is something that is important to me. I don't state a position. I had positions in court, so when I go into public and I say, what's your situation? I don't put upon anybody what I believe. And I can listen to Joe and Larry and the conversation to Mike and tonight with you, Mark, and I can say that's spot on. That's exactly in accordance with law. What I'm trying to do is to impress upon people that I spend time with that the system is so damn deceitful and corrupt. They won't even respond to letters and answer genuine good faith belief convictions. I mean, Frank Wolf was my congressman, and it wasn't until I was under criminal investigation that he assigned Nancy from his staff to guide me through whatever I needed, but he still refused to answer a question from a legislative perspective. So I typically do not answer, but I do acknowledge what is true and what is factual. And my whole premise is prove jurisdiction. How am I liable? And where do you have the authority? I begin with authority. And I do that with everything, whether it's a traffic ticket, child support, a zoning issue, adding a hip roof to a house. It doesn't matter. Drinking a beer on my front porch in Virginia, in my hometown, was illegal. It was in violation of the ordinance. And so the question is, by what authority? And then jurisdiction. And it's all driven upon presumption. So I spend all my time not necessarily vetting what is a legal conclusion, but impressing upon how the system works, so that all of those conclusions, which the system, the Liberty Dialogue system, vets in order to give people the best answer.
Well, thank you, Beau and Sissy, for your presentations. And, we'll be saving this show for the future so other people can learn. For Larry's website, you can go to Becraft Briefs Dixieland, and then Larry's is right up at the top. Anyway, so you go to Dixieland Law Journal here, all kinds of great information. My website is agentfortruth.com. I always like to point out blog articles because I wrote a couple articles on the 1040A scam, and I think people will enjoy seeing just how the IRS perpetrates a scam with their own computer system. In addition, you can watch all kinds of video at the website, speed on those. I also have an X account, Joseph Bannis there. And if you look up, Mr. President or Yes to Hell With is where Beau's video was. Pulled up this Willie Nelson article to show that it was in 1990, scribed, and then typed up JamesBowersJohnson.com, bio, Beau, and then he mentioned Before You Trust, pretty much all that we went through tonight. And of course, the thumb drive that we talk about is something that you can acquire. Thanks everyone for joining us, late on a Saturday night. We really enjoy this opportunity to share information. God bless everyone. Please pray for our country. You're probably already doing that, but let's redouble our prayers. God's given our country a lot of blessings, mountains of blessings. Let's just keep them.